Shabbat Shalom again, brethren. It's now a privilege and honor to present the great Kahan, David Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, brethren. It is truly an honor and a privilege to address the called out ones of the House of Yahweh. You may be seated. The title of the sermon here this morning is The Beast System, the Great Horror of Revelation, the same today as it was from the beginning. Satan targets the children in order to control and teach them in order to perpetuate the beastly system. I'd like to begin with a law, Deuteronomy 24 verse 7, which states, if a man is caught kidnapping one of his brothers of the children of Israel and treats him as a slave or sells him, the kidnapper must be put to death. In this way, you will purge the evil from among you. I'm going to cover two articles here this morning, which talk about a system of kidnapping that's going on out in the world today. And, you know, this is not something new. This has been from the beginning. I'd like to read, if you would turn to Daniel chapter 1 and verse 3, we can see how the children of Israel were affected when they were taken to Babylon and trained by King Nebuchadnezzar. So in Daniel chapter 1 verse 3, now the king directed Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, to bring in certain of the children of Israel, those of the king's seed and those of the nobles, children in whom there was no blemish, but handsome, gifted in wisdom, knowledgeable, and quick to learn and understand, such as would have the ability to take the place in the king's palace. In other words, learn his customs, learn their ways, and forget the laws that they had learned. And continuing here, and whom they could teach the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So that was his purpose. If you turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9, Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9, we're going to see that there's nothing new today compared to what it was in ancient days. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, that which has already been will be yet again. That which has already been done is what will yet be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, look, this is new? It has already been in ancient times well before us. And well before this time period, these last days, when these things are being done again. In Proverbs chapter 22, we are taught, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, this is a lesson that Satan has learned also. And she does her best to train children up in her way so that they don't learn Yahweh's way. If you turn to Revelation chapter 17, I'd like to just cover a couple points here in Revelation 17. In verse 1 we see, and there came one of the seven Malachim who had the seven bowls and talked with me, saying to me, come and I will show you the sentence of the great whore that sits upon many waters. We're going to see the seven hills of Rome, the Catholic Church, that system, that beastly system that influences and controls many people in the world today. Notice in verse 4, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. So very, very wealthy, very rich. In verse 9, and here is a mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits. And this has been explained in very great detail. This is speaking of the seven hills of Rome, Italy, which is the seat of the Catholic Church, the Vatican. In verse 15, and he said to me, the waters which you saw where the whore sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And verse 18, and the woman you saw is that great city, Rome, the seat of the Vatican, which reigns over the kings of the earth. The first article I'd like to cover here was published or reported by the BBC, and the title of this article is Spain's Stolen Babies. Spain's Stolen Babies. Spain is a European country, one of the European Union countries. And the subtitle here is Spanish society has been shaken by allegations of theft and trafficking of thousands of babies by nuns, priests, and doctors, which started under Francisco Franco, and continued up till the 1990s, just a couple years ago. This stealing of babies in Spain was going on. Some of the main facts regarding this report from the BBC: Spain stolen babies, how many? More than 900 cases are being investigated, but new cases are still coming to light. Lawyers say the total could reach 300,000 children that were actually stolen over the time period spoken of here. Who benefited? Initially, the fascist. Francisco Franco was a fascist, affiliated with Hitler, affiliated with Mussolini. Initially, the fascist, by bringing up the children of their enemies. Later, children were taken from parents judged to be morally or economically deficient. In other words, poverty or a disagreement in the belief structure. And placed in approved Catholic, often childless families. Why did it take so long to expose? And the answer to that, the church and medical profession are highly respected, and Spanish law does not require the biological mother's name on the birth certificate. The article tells a story of one woman who 40 years ago, this woman had 3 daughters and lots of grandchildren today, but she never got over the loss of her firstborn, a son, nearly 40 years ago. She had come to think she was crazy for believing he was alive instead of dead and buried, as hospital doctors had told her. In 1991, when this woman was 23 and not long married, she gave birth to what she was told was a healthy baby boy. But he was immediately taken away for so-called routine tests. 9 hours later, a nun, who was also a nurse, coldly informed her that her baby had died. They would not let her have her son's body, nor would they tell her when and where the funeral would be. Why didn't she question the hospital staff? And her response, doctors, nuns, she said, almost in horror, I couldn't accuse them of lying. This was Franco's Spain, a dictatorship. Even now, we Spaniards tend not to question authority. The scale of the baby trafficking was unknown until this year, when 2 men, Antonio Barroso and Juan Luis Moreno, childhood friends from a seaside town of Barcelona, discovered that they had been bought from a nun. Their parents weren't their real parents, and their life had been a lie. One of these men discovered the truth when the man he had called father all his life was on his deathbed, and this man told him, I bought you from a priest in Zaragoza. He said that Antonio had been bought as well. So when these two found out that they had been purchased from the Catholic Church, basically, and with the doctors in collusion, they went to the press and blew the whistle on this whole situation. And then many other people started coming forth with similar stories that this woman had. And this BBC reporter went to the government officials and asked if this was true, and they said, we don't have, yes, without a doubt, how many? They said, I dare say there are many people that are affected by this situation. Lawyers believe that up to 300,000 babies were taken. They were stolen. They were kidnapped. The practice of removing children from parents deemed undesirable and placed with approved families began in the 1930s under the dictator General Francisco Franco. At that time, the motivation may have been ideological. In other words, he was trying to get rid of his enemies by stealing their children, raising them up under his ideology. But the reporter reports here, but years later, it seemed to change. Babies began to be taken from their parents considered not morally deficient, economically deficient, poor, and also, the article reports, it became a money spinner. Money spinner means it became profitable, a source of income for the Catholic Church. The scandal is closely linked to the Catholic Church, which under Franco assumed a prominent role in Spain's social services, including hospitals, schools, and children's homes. What's new under the sun? It's the same way today. Nuns and priests compiled waiting lists of would-be adoptive parents, while doctors were said to have lied to mothers about the fate of their children. I'd just like to link to the Catholic Church. I'd just like to reference the Prophetic Word magazine here, make the connection with the Pharisees of old. Pastor writes here in the May 2011 Prophetic Word magazine, he writes, the fact that the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes were teachers of Christianity, they did not keep Yahweh's laws. They only taught a pretense in order to deceive. This is the same thing that the Vatican does today. All religions today, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, only teach traditions. They do not teach or seek Yahweh's righteousness. And then Pastor continues here in this article from the May 2011 Prophetic Word. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes dropped their names when they moved to the 7 hills of Rome. And they reformed and redesigned their secret religion. This was prophesied by the prophet Daniel. He saw the evolution of what he called a beastly system that was made up of 11 religions and an army that stood on its part. And here in Luke, if you turn to Luke 16, verse 14, Luke 16, verse 14, that article said that this became a money spinner, in other words, a source of profit. Luke 16, 14, now the Pharisees, who were also lovers of money, heard all these things, and they sneered at Yeshua, sneered at him, and he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but Yahweh knows your hearts, for that which is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of Yahweh. And with respect to this money spinner, selling these children for cash, decades ago, the price on their heads was about $5,000 a child, which they reported in today's value might be about $25,000 for a child in today's money. So it was a source of income, and it was a means of taking these children away from their parents and putting them in a Catholic home where they could be taught the Catholic religion. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 9, it says, for those, I'm going to read this, 1 Timothy 6, 9, 10, and 11, but those who want to become rich will fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all evil, and there are some who are pursuing it have strayed from the faith, such as the Pharisees, later called Catholic, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But you, O man of Yahweh, flee from all these things and pursue righteousness, holiness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. Getting back to this article this information came from the BBC, one of the doctors whose name came up prominently in this whole article was a Dr. Vila. He stands accused of telling women their babies had died when they had not, and handing over these newborn children to couples for cash. The Spanish magazine published photographs of a dead baby kept in the freezer in his San Ramon clinic, supposedly to show mothers that their child had died. This BBC reporter made an appointment with this doctor, and when he found out that she was a BBC reporter, Dr. Vila grabbed the metal crucifix. I'm sure he held it upside down he held it by the sword and had But anyway, Dr. Vila grabbed the metal crucifix, which had been standing on his desk. He moved towards me, brandishing it in my face. Do you know what this is? And he gave the reporter's name. He said, I have always acted in his name, always for the good of the children and to protect the mothers. Enough. That's his response. you see the deception in his mind and in his determination to perpetuate his way. Babies' graves, the graves of these children, or supposed graves, babies' graves have been dug up across the country for DNA testing. Some have revealed nothing but a pile of stones, while others have contained adult remains. Spaniards have flocked to the clinics to take DNA tests in hopes of reuniting their families. Okay, I'd like to move on to this next article here. This one hits a little closer to home. This has to do with the state of South Dakota, their child welfare system. This article came from National Public Radio. The title of it is Incentives and Cultural Bias Fuel the Foster System. What you see here that the same words are used, essentially, that we had in this article regarding the stealing babies in Spain. Incentives, money, cultural bias, call it what you want, but the essence of this article is that Indian children are being put in foster homes in an exceptionally high number in the state of South Dakota. So in this article, that was a radio broadcast, All Things Considered, but the key findings here in this investigation of the child welfare system, the foster care system in the state of South Dakota, the key findings was that each year South Dakota removes an average of 700 Native American children, Indian children, from their homes. Indian children are less than 15% of the state's child population, but they make up more than 50% in child foster care. Despite the Indian Welfare Act, which says another key point, despite the Indian Child Welfare Act, which says Native American children must be placed with their family members, relatives, their tribes, or other Native Americans, despite that the law says put them in an Indian home if you're going to take them away from a different Indian family. Despite that, Native children are more than twice as likely to be sent to foster care as children of other races, even in similar circumstances. Nearly 90% of the Native American children sent to foster care in South Dakota are placed in non-Native homes or group care. So they want to take their culture, the Galilean Indian culture, away from these people. They want to train them up in approved homes, just like they did in South Dakota. In Spain. Less than 12% of the Native American children in South Dakota foster care have been physically or abused in their homes. So less than 12%, which is below the national average. The state says parents have neglected their children, which is a subjective term. So it's all subject to some government official's whim, whether these children are taken away or not. But the tribe leaders tell NPR that social workers call neglect is often poverty and sometimes Native tradition. So it's either Native, many times it's poverty, they may not have as much as they think they should have, or it's Native tradition. They want to remove their traditions from them. A close review of South Dakota budget shows that the South Dakota Treasury received more than $100 million a year, $100 million a year to subsidize this foster care program. So you see, it's also about money. This article talks about this grandmother who received a call one day, and she said, it was a social worker from the Department of Social Services. She said her daughter, Erin Yellow Robe, was going to be arrested for drugs. Howe couldn't believe it. She had never seen any sign of drugs or any other problem. And then the social worker changed Howe's life. She said she was coming to take Howe's grandchildren away. The next day, a car pulled up outside Yellow Robe's house. Howe's daughter wouldn't let one of the twins' babies go. She kept saying she hadn't done anything wrong. The social worker took the children, buckled them into car seats. They were sitting and they left. And so they took 2 of the children, and then continuing in the article here, it says, except now a generation of children is once again losing its connection to its culture, this time through state-run foster care. So an inordinately high number of Native children are being taken away in South Dakota and put into foster care. In South Dakota, Native American children make up 15% of the population, yet they make up half of the children in foster care. About 700 Native children are taken away every year. 90% of them are put in non-Native homes. State officials say they're doing everything they can to keep Native families together. Poverty, crime, and alcoholism are all real problems in South Dakota's reservations and in the state's poorest areas. But state records show that there is another powerful force at work: money. The federal government sends the state thousands of dollars for each child it takes. On the day they were taken, How waited with her daughter, thinking she was going to go to jail for this supposed drug use. But when they investigated this, when someone else investigated this later, but one source who had reviewed the department's files said the social worker believed Yellow Rose was abusing her prescription drugs. They believed she was abusing her prescription drugs, but the same source also says the file notes the case was based on a rumor. It was based on a rumor from a woman who, the source said, didn't like the Howe family. Well, then, not too long after that, well, here's an example of the Crow Creek tribe lost more than 33 children in recent years. The reservation has only 1,400 people. Last year, this one official asked social services officials to tell him where the children were and who they were placed with. 7 months later, he says every single child was placed in a white foster home. And that's another thing. They have all these Native American, these Indian foster care homes, but there's no children for them. They always seem to end up in a non-Native home. Of course, we think, and this is what one of the South Dakota state officials says. Of course, we think it's legal what we are doing, she said. And she cited 2 laws. One is a federal statute that only pertains to emergency situations. The other is a state law that allows the state to remove children in danger. What does that mean? What does that mean? Put rapid definition around that one. This several months after these twins were taken, the state also took these other 2 children who were a little older. So they took them also, placed them in foster care. So now all 4 of the children were gone, and no charges were brought against this woman for abuse of prescription drugs. What occurred here is that this article says this one Indian official, he says, not a welfare official, but an Indian official, he says that there's one word that makes it possible for the state to remove Janice Howe's grandchildren and more than 700 other Native kids each year: neglect. The state says people have neglected their children. Walters, along with other officials from 7 of South Dakota's tribes, he says what he interviewed says what social workers call neglect is often poverty and sometimes Native traditions. That's the reason they're judging against these people. But here's the thing. Every time a state puts a child in foster care, the federal government sends money. Because South Dakota is poor, it receives even more money than other states, almost $100 million a year. And the other thing is, then there's the bonus money. Take, for example, sometimes the federal government calls the adoptive incentive bonus. States receive money if they move kids out of foster care and into adoption, which is what they were planning to do with this woman's children. Move them out of foster care into adoption. They get $4,000 a child for that. And the other thing here, these Indian children, they consider those special needs children. Every one of them is classified as a special needs child. So therefore, they get like 3 times as much money for an Indian child, taking them away, putting them in foster care, as they do for, a different nationality, if you want to call it that. So you see what's at work in this legalized stealing of Indian children for money and to take them out of deprive them of their culture and deprive them of their families. In this particular situation with this family here, they went to the tribe, and the tribe passed a resolution. They passed a resolution warning the state that if they did not return the yellow-robed children, there were never any charges filed against this woman. The state would be charged with kidnapping and prosecuted. They didn't think it would work, but a few weeks later, a car pulled up outside the Howe house with Antoinette, Roshana, and the 2 twins. Grandma, we're here to stay. We get to stay. But notice, state officials offered no explanation or apology. The social worker warned that this was a trial run and the state could take them back at any time. I'd like you to turn to Revelation chapter 21. And if you look at verses 3 and 4, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of Yahweh is with men. That's what we're looking for, brothers and sisters. And Yahweh will wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, for there will be no more pain. For the former things, such as this legalized kidnapping, will have passed away. In Psalm chapter 6 and verse 6, we are weary with groaning. All night we flood our beds with tears and drench our couches with weeping. So you can see some of the people affected by this kidnapping, this legalized kidnapping. They're crying out to Yahweh. They don't know Yahweh. And that's the purpose of the witness in these last days, to show them where Yahweh can be found here at the great House of Yahweh in Abelin, Texas. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 1, next I looked into all the acts of oppression that are done under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed who have no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors was power, such as the power of the Catholic Church, the power of the state governments, but they have no comforter. In Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 15, there is nothing new under the sun. What was done in ancient times is being done today. In Jeremiah 31 verse 15, and this is what Yahweh says, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children, refused to be comforted for her children because they were no more. All these people out there in Spain, South Dakota, not the only places in the world, that are losing their children to this system. In Deuteronomy chapter 26 and verse 19, cursed is the one who perverts justice, due to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow. Then all the people shall say, so be it. In Revelation chapter 9 and verse 20, and the rest of the men who were not killed by these plagues, this prophesied nuclear war and these other plagues that are upon the earth in these last days, as we learn about here in the House of Yahweh, and we can see clearly in the news. And the rest of the men who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and gods of gold and silver, the money that's out there and is being taken for these children that are being sold. Gold and silver and brass and stone and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. Neither did they repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts, of their stealing of children in order to train them up in their ways. And my last scripture here, Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 12. I'd like to read 12 through 14. And because iniquity, the breaking of Yahweh's laws, will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. But he who endures until the end, the same will be saved. And this message of the kingdom will be preached to all the world by the one who bears witness to all nations, which is our beloved pastor and overseer, Great Kahan Yisrayl Hawkins, the one who bears witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Brethren, if you'd all please stand. I'd like to turn it over at this time to the Great Kahan Zephaniah Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We have some more news video this week, and this is mostly revolving around the fulfillment of the prophecy of the nuclear wars which are coming, which are going to kill 4/5 of the Earth's population. But the first one deals with Medvedev in Russia, and he's talking about how the U.S.'s missile defense system is going to result in Russia doing the same thing. And this is really Russia realizing that the United States has kind of tricked them on this START treaty, and so that they're threatening to pull out of the START treaty. It's the new START treaty. This does not, even if they were to fulfill this treaty, it still would not eliminate nuclear weapons by any means. It would still be far more than enough to destroy the whole Earth several times over. Then the next one is the Iranians attacking the British embassy, and so the British pull out and the Germans pull out. And you got to keep in mind with this, the scripture that talks about wolves in sheep's clothing, because one of the things that the United States would do before it started a nuclear war is probably pull people out of its embassies. So they could even be these Iranians that are attacking to give them an excuse to pull people out of the embassies so that they can then attack. All of this is, it's trickery that they're playing, or it could be Iranians. No one really knows, but it's a significant thing, and it does show the nuclear war, as Pastor said, in and around the great river Euphrates is coming. And then the last one is an analysis of an attack of Iran. So now let's play the video.
Pay close attention. What you're seeing today is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Examining the news as it relates to Bible prophecy, Qatar President Medvedev not too pleased right now with the recent moves of the United States to position their missile defense that close to Russia's borders.
That's right, Jeff. You know, they say there's no honor amongst thieves. I guess there's no honor amongst two countries that have thousands of missiles capable of destroying with nuclear capabilities. Now, in a recent statement by President Dmitry Medvedev, Russia has threatened to pull out of the Strategic Nuclear Arms Treaty, or the START Treaty for short, and stop its nuclear disarmament program, due in part to the United States' plans to deploy its missile defense system in Europe. Now, this new treaty, START treaty, was signed in April of 2010, if you remember. And the reason for the deployment of America's missile defense system is in an attempt to protect the United States' interests militarily from Iran and other rogue nations who might seek a missile attack against America. In addition to Russia's threat, they also announced that they ordered military commanders to prepare for the deployment of nuclear-capable, short-range ballistic missiles to Kaliningrad on the Polish and Lithuanian border, as well as other areas of its border, in order to secure its ability to take out any part of the U.S. missile defense system in Europe.
Now, Medvedev is wanting a legal guarantee from the United States that its missile defense system is not aimed at Russian targets. Again, the United States insists that its missile defense system is only aimed at Iranian targets and other so-called rogue nations.
Now, Russia also said that if the actions of the United States continues, it might withdraw from the newly signed START II treaties, but that it's not closing the doors on open dialogue with the United States, and it expects reasonable and constructive approaches from their Western counterparts. Now, with the impending threats of war and the mindset of every nation for itself, not even two superpower members of the quartet can trust each other in regards to its own attempts to guard itself from the attacks from other nations.
Well, we also see tensions increase this week between Iran and the West, when hundreds of Iranian demonstrators stormed two British diplomatic buildings in Tehran. Demonstrators smashed windows, burned the British flag, and ransacked offices at the British embassy. Now, these protesters clashed with riot police and shouted, "The embassy of Britain should be taken over," and "death to England." Now, although Iran's foreign ministry expressed regret for the, quote, unacceptable behaviors by some demonstrators, British Prime Minister David Cameron called the events outrageous and indefensible. The failure of the Iranian government to defend British staff and property was a disgrace, he said in a statement. The Iranian government must recognize that there will be serious consequences for failing to protect our staff. We will consider what these matters should be in the coming days, he stated. Now, British Foreign Secretary William Hague said, "The idea that the Iranian authorities could not have protected our embassy or that this assault could have taken place without some degree of regime consent is fanciful." That statement came after the Iranian diplomats were given 48 hours to leave Britain. Now, foreign ministers will be meeting in the next few days to discuss their next moves, but tougher sanctions on Iran are very likely. Now, Katan, this incident, along with all the other incidents that have recently taken place in the Middle East, are lining up exactly with what Yisrayl Hawkins has been teaching for 40 years now, that a nuclear war will start in and around that great river Euphrates, killing a third of men over that fourth part of the earth. And from there, it's going to escalate into a global nuclear war.
And that's exactly what we're looking at there, Jeff, a big-time war that's getting ready to take over the whole nation.
So what type of scenarios are we looking at as this war begins?
Well, as we reported before, concerning the turmoil in the Middle East, Israel's plans to engage preemptively against Iran's nuclear facilities is still an option that's on the table. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that the greatest danger facing Israel and the world is the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran. Now, analysts say if a war between Israel and Iran were to launch, it could develop into a fully fledged war that could burn the whole region. A region, by the way, that makes up 6% of the world's population and accounts for 20% of its armed conflicts. Now, Israel has at least two options it might use to attack Iran. Now, Plan A. Israel launches a limited surgical preemptive military strike attacking with long-range aircraft and armed drones, firing cruise missiles from its submarines in the Arabian Sea, or it might launch its latest Jericho 3 missiles. Now, but the Iranians, they're a little bit wiser than they were a few years ago, and they have spread their nuclear facilities all across the country. So in this scenario, Israel would actually have to hit 7 different nuclear facilities, but they wouldn't be able to inflict long-term or permanent damage. And as of course, in response, Iran would have to attack Israel, and they would retaliate, making every Israeli and U.S. ally in the region a potential target. Syria could join in, and Iran's proxy forces in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah, would launch rockets into Israel, as well as the possibility of unconventional attacks on Israeli interests across the globe. Now, Plan B, on the other hand, the United States enters into the war games, protecting its interests in the Middle East and its push for obtaining Iran. The first order on the agenda, cyber warfare, which they recently attempted. Stage 2 will be massive ordnance air blast, or MOAB, or mother of all bombs as they're commonly known, the largest conventional weapons that the United States has that's non-nuclear, along with a new generation of bunker busters. Now, America's strike on Iran would be neither limited or surgical, being able to attack over 10,000 different targets overnight, destroying all Iranian land and sea bases, as well as destroying all known nuclear facilities, leaving Iran in flames. In any of these cases, of course, if the U.S. or Israel were to hit Iran's nuclear facilities, any facility that was going full steam, it would create a giant, dirty bomb.
Almost as if a nuclear bomb went off.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And the results would be between 1 to 2 million Iranian civilians dead. Now, Iran would launch everything it had into Israel and Afghanistan. U.S. would ask its NATO allies, Turkey, Russia, and China to join in, and the resulting conflicts would spark more conflict throughout the globe, causing uprisings and more deaths. Also, don't forget about the surging oil prices that would drive the global economy into chaos. Now, as far as I can see from what we've been reporting on and what we've been seeing in the news, none of the leaders of these countries are actually truly working to bring forth a peaceful solution. In fact, they're moving in a direction that's going to drive both them and their nations into the brink of total destruction.
All right. Thanks, Katan. We'll pay close attention to what's coming up next. Yisrayl Hawkins explaining how Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. For YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for joining us.
Everyone please stand. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins. Hello, everyone. Praise Yahweh, you're looking great. You may be seated. You may be seated. If anyone can't see the prophecies coming to pass now, there's something badly wrong. Something badly wrong with their way of thinking. What I want to do today, of course, is show you how the prophets before. I want to call back to your memory. All the things that we've brought out in the mark of the beast and about 20 other of our books about this prophecy, the nuclear baby too. That was the last one. If you haven't read that book, you should get it and know that Yahweh is carrying out His plan. And what He's prophesied is coming to pass both for the nations and of course for the house of Yahweh, which He has established a little group to take this mighty message of Yahweh to all nations. And of course that's what we're doing at this time. Praise Yahweh. And the news shows that these prophecies are coming to pass by leaps and bounds now. It's getting so that the nations are so angry with one another, they're ready to go into first strike. I need to tell you one thing: eat whey, drink whey. That will build your immune systems up, make your muscles big, protect you from breast cancer. And now this says the latest reports are saying breast cancer in men, women, and children. It will stop this whey that comes from milk. Isn't that beautiful? And Yahweh created it for our protection in this time period. If you don't like it, if you don't like the taste of whey, drink a little bit when you're real thirsty. Don't drink anything before that. And this will give your taste buds the chance to start building taste buds. You know what makes Ritz cracker taste better? It's probably the first one you ate, or the saltine. The other crackers taste great too, but you have to develop a taste bud for food. And if the first cracker you ever ate was a soda cracker, of course you're going to have taste buds for it. And if you never have eaten
a Ritz cracker, you won't have it. You have to develop it. Well, that's the same thing with any food you don't like. You just wait till you get thirsty, then take a swallow of whey, and tomorrow you'll have some taste buds for it. You'll say, hey, this tastes different from yesterday. Chocolate cake. You probably didn't like it when you first ate it, did you? Yeah, you did. Sure did. Yeah, that rice and gravy and lamb today, they got my mouth watering when I heard that. The donkey in the cloud. Now this shows us, brethren, that Yahweh is well aware of His work and what it's doing and the unity that we're developing here. You know, when that donkey is standing there staring at that olive branches, you know, you can tell from the intents. When I saw that in that cloud, you know, I said, what is that donkey looking at? Because he had his ears perked, and you could tell he was really looking at something there that evening. And I said, what could that be? And why is he shaped like that, tail and all, so perfect, with a pack on his back? I said, this is beyond anything that Mary could come up with. And then we found out later in the seventh new moon, that cloud was also the shape of that olive tree. And our men it just occurred that our men got a picture of that, and they showed it to me. You can plainly see that that's the shape of that olive tree that he's showing there, and that was at a different time. Anyway, start watching for these things and be aware of them. But Yahweh is aware of what we're doing, and He's guiding. Yeshua's guiding us and bringing this thing, bringing our work about and bringing us to perfection. And I can see that in the lives of the people. I can see people working together. They're determined to stop their cranky moments and hurting people's feelings. They're determined to stop it, and of course they turn quickly and apologize for it. But I want you to remember Daniel, but I want you to go over to Revelations first. This came into my mind that I should show this first when I was watching in my office the monitor of the First News. In Revelations 10 is when it all comes to a finish. In the voice of the seventh trumpet, or seventh Moloch, it's also called the seventh trumpeter, when he will begin to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh will be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophets. Well, that's what we're seeing there right now, is his servants the prophets. And in verse 18 of chapter 11, now this is speaking of the two witnesses, chapter 11 in the first part. Then verse 18 says, we see the nations were angry. Well, of course, this is speaking of the people too, as well as the nations angry with each other. And of course we can see this, and everyone knows that something is going to take place. They just don't know what. We're the only ones that's actually showing what the nations have been assigned to do under the authority of this beastly system. It's no accident that all of this stuff is taking place, as we see in Revelations, the 6th chapter. But here we see that the nations are angry, and your judgment should be judgment instead of wrath. Come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged. That's speaking of the last part of Yahweh's plan, the time of the dead that will resurrect the dead, that they should be sentenced, and that you should give reward to your servants, the prophets, and to all the saints, to those who reverence your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Then the house of Yahweh was made open for all to see in heaven, and the ark of the covenant was seen in the house, and there was lightnings and voices and thunderings and earthquakes all of this was going on in this time period here, as Matithia also showed, or the Savior showed us in Matithia 24 here, speaking in verse 7. Now he's speaking of the end time or last days, as the disciples asked him about in verse 3. But he talks about the nations in verse 7. The nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And then you see in verse 29, then the final results of this. Well, I want you to go back to Daniel now, because Daniel shows how all of this comes about. And he puts the beastly system in it, showing the leader that we see in Revelation 17, where he says, "Come and I'll show you the sentence of this great whore that's leading this quartet." And Daniel has here in Daniel the 11th chapter, we see also in the 11th chapter, as in Revelations 11, that might help you to remember that. But Daniel 11 talks about here this estate that from which the armies gets their orders, and he says in verse 31, this is found on page 683. If that will help you go there any faster, I would like for everyone to read this for yourself. The Savior talked about this very thing here, this very prophecy, and saying that the temple would be destroyed. The temple wasn't destroyed until 70 CE. That's 40-something years after his death. But he says here, Daniel shows you here, Amos shows you that the Mount Zion would be plowed like a field. But Daniel shows that the armies, Daniel 11:31, he shows that the armies will stand on his part, and they will pollute the sanctuary. Now, of course, this sanctuary at that time was a shining example of righteousness that Solomon set up, and peace. They had peace even among their enemies. Their enemies said, "Hey, this is beneficial." But Yahweh gave them peace. Well, how did he give them peace? Through the character education. The peaceful solution, character education, was taught throughout Israel at that time. Of course, it started breaking down because it wasn't guarded. Like Yahweh said in Genesis, you've got to guard this. You can't allow this to break down. Right now, the Catholic Church is trying to say, they're going to extremes to try to make out like that they're evil of changing the Sabbath. The Sabbath day was just A-OK, and they're trying to make out like that the seventh day does not show Yahweh's time of creation. They're going to extremes to do so, but they're leaving out a lot of scriptures and a lot of things that I'll make them wish that they never allowed me to see that letter that they're writing. I intend to show the deception that is being brought forth from these letters that's going out to the Catholic churches and trying to defend. And the only reason they're trying to defend their evil is because people are asking questions about that. They're asking questions. They're saying, well, the seventh day is the Sabbath. Why are we keeping Sunday? Well, they're trying to defend the fact that they're keeping Sunday. They don't want to admit, well, this is in honor of the sun god, the same as Christmas. Christmas. Those who love gifts, get in line. Go spend all night. Camp out in front of the stores. Well, Yahweh says he's picking people that hate gifts, that actually hate gifts. We have a house full of them here, as you can tell. But this army here is going to stand on his part to destroy that sanctuary, the sanctuary of strength. Remember what the strength of Yahweh is, as Malachi shows. He shows it's the laws and the prophecies. That's the strength of Yahweh that brings peace between man and man, or woman and woman, and so forth. The strength of Yahweh. And they want to take away that strength. Well, of course, when they take away the strength from the people, this peaceful way of strength that turns the hearts and the minds, when they stop teaching that, then you see what the result of it today, when you see the nations are angry. Well, what made them angry? They took away the strength of Yahweh from those people, the strength that turns their hearts to peace, their minds to peace, instead of and put within it, the lust for money and power. Well, that's what you see in the world today, and the control. Remember the masters, the lords. Yeshua said, that they control, they forcefully control, or they rule. They're rulers. And he says the ones that are more powerful rule over them. Well, that's what you see in the world. You don't see this in Yahweh's government. In the peaceful solution character education, you can't find such a thing. And that's what Yeshua taught. Wash the feet of those you think is your enemy. If that will change your heart and your mind. Become. When everybody becomes humble and helpful and servant, a humble, helpful servant, then there will be no more fighting, and that's our job, is to bring them to that point. Well, they'll destroy the sanctuary they'll pollute it first, the sanctuary of strength, and then they will destroy it, and will take away this daily teaching of the laws. Someone put sacrifice there, but that it's not sacrifice. Sacrifices was only a reminder of sins. If you could get that in your mind, and the four horns of this wicked altar that reminds us of that. These four horns are four powers that form, that Daniel actually shows us, and they become stronger. The first one that was created was Babylon, and Yahweh said, I'm going to take you beyond Babylon. I'm going to let you go clear beyond Babylon and show you the end result of it. But those four horns, first we started with Babylon, then it came up to a greater power, and they formed in a greater power with more religions. They wound up with four great powers, or the combination of the most brutality of these powers, and of course a religion that would teach them that it was okay, that this was a righteous thing, and you could go to heaven if you just killed all of our enemies, that you'll go to heaven and rule there with this great ruling sword that you're carrying now. Well, this is what Daniel is showing here, and this, of course, without knowing the rest of the scriptures, you wouldn't know this. And then, of course, you replace it with the Lord or lords, the ruler in the heavens, trying to set herself over everything else, and of course, the lords on earth, the dying popes that they make gods out of, or the great conquerors that killed millions and millions of people. Destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, 153 years before Daniel, the prophet Isaiah, if you want to start turning to Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah was inspired to write how the 12 tribes were falling, and Satan, of course, was the leader of this destruction, and will bring about the destruction of all the governments on earth. This is the hand or the judgment that is set, Yahweh says. Turn over to Isaiah 1 first. Isaiah 1. And even today, we're dealing with this four great powers that rose up among the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes of Israel. We get letters all the time saying, why isn't some of the other preachers, if what you say is true, and in the Bible, why aren't some of the other preachers telling this? Well, can two walk together unless they be agreed? Are they agreeing with Yahweh? Find me a preacher that agrees with Yahweh, and he'll be here in the house. His house was established for this reason, to show these things. And once they see it, it's as simple as the nose on your face that Yahweh predicted it. Here in Isaiah 1 and verse 21, he says, "How has the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment." Now this means Jerusalem has become a harlot. And this, of course, was the great city that Solomon set up, King David before him, as an example to all Israel, as an example to all the world. Yahweh was worshipped there at one time, for a short time. Well, how has this faithful city become such a harlot? It was full of judgment and righteousness lodged in it, but now only murderers. Well, how has the whole world become the same thing? By taking away, polluting the sanctuary of strength, the house of Yahweh, polluting the strength of Yahweh. The house of Yahweh, brethren, was put there to bring the laws. And the kings were supposed to follow those laws. And they were told, if you don't do this, you're going to bring all this destruction upon yourselves. This was as far back as Deuteronomy. But before that, he even told Cain the same thing, and all the world has gone the way of Cain. Become only murderers. Your silver has become dross, and your wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebellious, and the companions of thieves. Everyone loves gifts and follows after rewards. They do not judge the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow come to them. No, you've got to have money to hire a lawyer for that. And you don't. The money is, of course, is what they're after. Now, if they can get it, then that's the way they do. They're glad to obey, to yield their time. Well, this is what Isaiah is showing about the 12 tribes now and how they became this way. And then in chapter 2, he says, it will come to pass in the last days. In the last days. That means it's going to go for all these years and finally come to pass in the last days now. Yahweh is going to establish his house, which will, verse 4, which will judge among the nations and will rebuke many people. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. If you look before that, it's because Yahweh is taking it out of Jerusalem, establishing his house in the top nation in the last days, taking the laws away from Jerusalem, who brought it, chapter 1, verse 21, who polluted his sanctuary of strength, took it away from them, and took it to the chief nation of all nations. So he shows them this, then he shows them in the last days the house of Yahweh would be established that would bring peace to all nations. What is left of the nations, as you could see on the news reports, they're getting ready to depopulate the earth by 4/5 of the earth's population, which coincidentally, that was exactly what Yahweh shows in his prophecies. Look at Isaiah 14. Now remember the Revelations 12:9 that says Satan deceives the whole world. Well, Yahweh shows here in Isaiah now that the 12 tribes and their powers are becoming lords, to lord it over. And that's what Yeshua said, this can't be among you. You can't do this. You got to become a servant and work with. You got to humble yourself and do what the priest teaches you to do. If you don't, you won't even begin. You won't even get started. The priest is going to teach you to be like Yeshua, exactly like Yeshua was. The image and likeness of Yahweh. That is what Yahweh is, a servant. Well, here in chapter 14 now, it says, how are you fallen? Well, look at verse 12. Chapter 14 of Isaiah, verse 12. How have you fallen, O Lucifer, child of light? She was once the teacher of light. But that's what we're told in Genesis. And then others' prophecies show the same thing, but out of her lust and greed and rebellious attitude, she turned to try to stop the creation of Yahweh. How are you cut down to the ground? You who weakened the nations? She's the one that's the leader of this very thing that is making the nations weak by polluting the strength of Yahweh, the tabernacle of strength, the house of Yahweh, by polluting it, taking away the strength of Yahweh, which is peace, joy, and love, which comes from Yahweh's laws. And notice in verse 13, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend above the heavens. I'll lift myself up and put myself above the heavens. Now, this is not geographical in which this is speaking. It's in the actions, in the mind, in attitude, in bringing about the power to be over the people instead of working with the people. I will raise my throne above the stars. I've showed you what that meant before, talking of the women. I will set in the highest place in the holy mountains, that is the uplifting of Yahweh's house of Yahweh, the promotion of the house of Yahweh. She's going to set her place there, which she did. The sanctuary of strength that Daniel spoke of, weakening the nation. Now look at verse 16. She said, those who see you will stare at you, and they will talk about you, saying, is this the one, the adversary, who shook the earth and made kingdoms to tremble? Well, of course, this is a prophecy now. A prophecy that Isaiah showed again in Isaiah 24, when he said the earth is going to reel to and fro, and it's going to sink like a hut. I was reading an article this week about one of the nuclear bombs that they used in Afghanistan. I didn't know they used a nuclear bomb in Afghanistan, but this article showed that they actually did. They used several in Afghanistan. Used one in Iraq, the article showed, and several in Afghanistan. One of them was so strong in the Tora Bora Mountains that it caused a huge earthquake there that is still for everyone to see, they said. But she shakes the earth. Are you the one who shook the earth? Well, it's this attitude now, and what she has done by taking away or polluting the sanctuary of strength. If a teaching came into the house of Yahweh right now and say we followed this stupidity of saying, well, we don't need to keep the Sabbath day. We could set any day we want to. Well, it wouldn't be the seventh day, would it? Are you too stupid, Pope, to see that creation was on the first day? The Sabbath day is proclaimed to be the seventh day. So if you put another one, it would have to be eighth day or fourth day or something. It couldn't be the seventh day. And there's only 7 days in each week. So you'd have to add a day to the week if you wanted it to be the 8th day. Either that or it'd have to be one of the other 7. Don't you see that? Are you too stupid to see that much, that far? You know, it makes you want to go to Rome and get in his face, you know. But they deceive the world. Well, see, each thing, if they could remove that, they'd remove their appointment with Yahweh, which they did. They removed their appointment, their 7th-day Sabbath appointment with Yahweh. Well, of course, without Yahweh's inspiration, which goes to mankind. He's the one that's doing this. They shut themselves off. So Yahweh said, well, since you didn't want to retain this knowledge, this wisdom of Yahweh, then I'm going to give you what? A reprobate mind to do those stupid things that you're doing now in trying to depopulate the earth by 4/5. So you can come back and rule, starting with 2 billion people. You want to come back and you want to rule those 2 billion people. This rulership is shown right here to be one of the lesser things that comes when you take away the strength of Yahweh, which is not rulership, it's leadership. It is love, kindness, mercy, teaching. Being a slave to others. That's what Yahweh is. But that's what's going to take over this whole universe. Believe me, Yahweh has power over the universe. And He could stop any of this right now. He could destroy the Catholic Church if He wanted to. He could destroy anything He wanted to. He has hail balls big enough to destroy Rome with one hail ball. And the way the scientists are talking now, they're saying, you know, these weather disasters that you're seeing, they are increasing. And this year you'll see more than you did last year. And he says, and they're saying that soon you're going to start seeing heat waves every other day. And these are some of the things that they're predicting because of this global warming. And of course we can see this now. We're seeing the unusual winds that comes with a tiny shower of rain. We're seeing the unusual flooding that is not controlled. You can tell that the enzymes are all defective. So that's part of the strength of Yahweh right there. You know, in guarding these things, we guard our own selves as well and our own atmosphere. But we haven't guarded them, of course, and they didn't want to retain Yahweh in their knowledge. So this is what comes when you start breaking Yahweh's laws. And of course, now they're saying it's global warming, and they're 100% sure that that's what it is causing this. If they would just show them the cause now of global warming, the true cause of global warming, then we could start making a headway. Whether Yahweh intends to show them that in any other way besides His house, I don't know, but maybe. But shook the earth and made the kingdoms to tremble by polluting the sanctuary of strength. This is how she did it. And this is Satan's doing. In verse 17, is this the one who made the world like a wilderness? So that's what it's coming to. Look on down to verse 21. He said, prepare slaughter for her children because of the iniquities of the fathers. The fathers are actually bringing about the slaughter of their own children. It's like if we could get everybody to see that, it's like the sheriff that one of our men went to see down in Florida. He used to be very brutal. That is in his thinking and attitude to the prisoners. Well, I saw him on the news one day, and he had changed. His attitude was changed, and he was going to the prisoners and saying, have you got everything you need today? Is everything all right with you? Well, the reason he changed his attitude was his son was in jail. A rapist, a brutal rapist, they have no feelings concerning their victims. But if they're standing on the sideline and they see their friend or they experience one of their children going through this horror, they take a totally different attitude. If we could get the world right now to seeing you're actually preparing slaughter for your children here by taking away the strength of Yahweh, which is His laws, statutes, and judgments. And Mr. Pope, if you'd look in Yeshua, the Savior's words, he said, this is the laws of Yahweh. If you would just stop and think, this is the laws of Yahweh, he said, that changes the hearts and minds of all the people. You could be in unity with your people instead of all of you fighting against each other. The popes that started the crusades against Yahweh's people, one of the worst, he says to his own people, stop fighting among yourselves and come fight with me, and we'll go kill all of these people of Yahweh and take their land and possessions. Now this is in history. This is part of history, one of the popes. Well, of course, Satan has prepare slaughter for her children because of the iniquities of their fathers. That's what brings it about. As Isaiah 24 shows in the last days also, look at verse 24 here. He says, Yahweh of hosts has vowed, saying, remember, they didn't want to retain Yahweh in their knowledge, so this cut them off from Yahweh, and then this gave them the reprobate minds that they have today, where they want to gang up on a nation and go in and take it, and they have no sympathy for men, women, or children in that nation. And they do intend, as the news analyzers, as they so rightly brought out in this news that you just watched, they do intend to devastate Iran. Well, this is just nothing more than a piece of land to them. It's not even a piece of meat. But they're going to scatter people's bodies, parts of bodies, all over, devastate the land with the fallout that comes behind it that hurts even worse. When we were at the UN, we met people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that didn't die from it. Well, those bombs were dropped in my lifetime. They were invented and dropped in my lifetime, as Yahweh said they would be. Those bombs, these people were further enough away that they didn't die, but every inch of their body was scarred. And they came to the UN saying, please, no more, begging, no more. Well, you look at them, okay, yeah, that's fine. But you got your heart set it on a piece of land called Iran. And you've classified this person, this piece of land, as your possession, but also your enemy. To hell with everything in it. Men, women, and children. What do we care? They're suffering. What does it matter to us? Well, that's the slaughter we have prepared for our children. That's the slaughter they're preparing for Iran. Yahweh shows it's going to bite back. Retaliation brings more retaliation. It's never solved a problem that I know of. Two wrongs don't make a right, as my dad always said. It never makes anything right. But here we're willing to go to war, sacrifice our children, men, women, and children. It's going to come our way too, big time. Yahweh shows it's going to come our way big time. No one's going to escape this. 4/5 of the earth's population is going to be wiped out. Think of the devastation to the land after that and the hurting and pain that's going to go with this. And you can see what polluting the sanctuary of strength has brought to the 12 tribes of Israel, who is bringing to pass this great 4 powers represented by the 4 horns, the altar of death, disease, and sickness. Well, in verse 24, Yahweh has allowed this. This is part of His plan. Notice, nothing is taking place that's not part of His plan. And He's going to show heaven and earth what this brings, what sin brings. Take away the sanctuary or pollute the sanctuary of strength. Don't guard it. Let it go to hell. Don't guard this way. Just become a part of it. And this is the reason that Yahweh said that the sins, all the sins, the deaths in all the world will be held on your head too. Well, it is right now of the whole world. What Satan is bringing forth here, what she has brought forth, what the world is following. But Yahweh of hosts has vowed, saying, just as surely as I have planned, so will it come to pass. Look on down to verse 26. This is the purpose, the plan that is purposed upon the whole earth. This is the hand that is stretched out upon all nations. And verse 29, the last 3 words, it's going to come from the fiery flying serpents. Serpents straight from Satan, straight from hell. They don't even realize what they're following, but the Pope wants to pass out some more deception and tell you, don't keep the Sabbath day. Why do you think he's doing that? Because the House of Yahweh is showing everyone in the world that we've cut ourselves off from Yahweh and our appointments with Yahweh, which is starting with the Sabbath day. He's saying, well, those people, they just said, well, that they wanted to worship that as a day of creation. No, that's not what they said at all, Pope. Go read it again. Get you a book of Yahweh and read it in the book of Yahweh. It don't say they... It doesn't say they did that because it celebrates the day of creation. It says to do that because Yahweh made holy that day, so you could be with Yahweh on that day, having a holy convocation. And then read the Savior's words in Luke 24:25. He calls you a fool. The apostles also called you a fool. Read Yochanan, 1 Yochanan 2:4. He calls you a fool. The Savior calls you a fool. Do you want to be fools? All of you want to be fools and follow the Pope into this destruction? 4/5 of the earth's population? Is there no sympathy at all, no feeling, no love, no concern at all, no natural affection at all in you today in any way? I think the only place on earth that you find natural affection is the house of Yahweh in this time period. I know I'm out of time, but let's go over to Daniel 7 right quick, because after we're shown in Isaiah what Yahweh intends to do somewhat, you have to get all the prophecies, and they go from Genesis long before Isaiah They go from Genesis clear through, and Genesis 49, in fact, shows the last days and who the 12 tribes are and who they are today. They're the whole world today and still fighting among themselves. If you read the Kings, the books of the Kings and the Chronicles, you'll see how the kings and among the 12 tribes, because of their attitudes, they hated each other. They were fighting each other. And sometimes, people on the sidelines would actually cry and beg them not to go and slaughter their own brothers and sisters. And this is taking place now in the whole world. You chose this way to pollute the sanctuary of strength, then Yahweh says in the last days, this is what it's going to be. And we look on the news, and sure enough, here it comes. Everything that the prophet said would take place because you changed the Sabbath day. That was the first thing you did. Well, of course, here in Daniel, Mr. Pope, it starts by showing you what you did, what your fathers did, by cutting yourself off. Yahweh shows you the 4 great powers of the 12 tribes of Israel. The way the histories have it, one kingdom went in and destroyed the other. That's not what they did at all. And the true history, which is the Holy Scriptures, shows that yes, there was a leader, and he became strong and mighty and killed a bunch of people. And then another leader rose up, and he added more religions to it and more power to it, more higher education to it, more sophistication in their weapons, and so forth. And then a third one increased it a little more to where it became brutal. And then the fourth one was the most brutal of all. Show them just how brutal you can be in your tortures and killings. And that's what our Savior suffered. To hang a man on a stake. The stoning that would take place, it was all in an instant. What they wanted people to see when they hung the Savior on the tree, they wanted you to see the suffering and how miserable they could be and how brutal they could be. And that's shown in Genesis 49. And says, let us not be in that council. But the whole world is to that point right now. They're being trained with the movies. I remember back John Wayne movies when I was a child. And I remember how they were bringing forth these teachings then. The toughest person. Well, of course, Goliath can be destroyed with one stone. So, this solves nothing. It just brings more retaliation. And the enemy pulls back, of course. But they come again and again and again. And you see this now. And you see Russia. We don't have time to go into chapter 7. But you see Russia and China, people, and Pakistan, you see these nations now getting worried. It's not that they think they're right by going to war with the United States. It's out of fear. And that's what you see in the nations today, the fear. They're fearing that the United States is going to take their land, their possessions. They're going to wipe them out. And what the United States is saying to Iran now, they want to devastate it, according to the news analysts that we're seeing, who analyze today's news, and they say this is what we see right here. These men are getting paid top dollar from the governments to do this. And they're saying what they want to do, as you saw in the film, they made it clear, they want to devastate Iran. Well, what's Russia thinking? Next, they're going to devastate Russia? Are they coming after me, China next? Are they coming after Pakistan next? Yes, they say yes. And anyone who helps Iran, they say, we're coming after you next. Well, this shows Rome in action. The roaming Rome in action. They stand on the 7 hills of Rome where Yahweh said, and we'll see next week, where Yahweh said he would send them. And there they would send their roving armies out. And they would take over and bring back the possessions of the land. That's what they were for. They'd kill the people if they didn't want to submit to paying the taxes. Kill them and replace them with other people, but bring back all their possessions. Well, that's what they did to the sanctuary of strength, too. They destroyed it, took all the artifacts, which is worth billions of dollars today. There's no telling how much gold that was stored there. These people brought in billions of dollars in gold and silver. and they hid it. And it was all carried to Rome, every bit of it, every last shekel of it. Well, so much for gold and silver and the power in gold and silver. No power there, as anyone can see. Your only power, brethren, is in Yahweh. Your only hope is in Yahweh. We're now asking the question, are you ready for nuclear war? How do you get ready for nuclear war? You better get yourself to the house of Yahweh and repent and make things right with Yahweh. That's the way to get ready for this nuclear war. The armies do not have the solutions, and now they're admitting that. In fact, the top what do they call them? Colonels. They said that there is no military solution now for Syria, and said it's going to be a mistake when we invade Syria. No military solutions. This won't solve anything. What this is going to do, according to the news analyst and according to prophecy, will bring us more hatred, more retaliation, more fear, and then the strike first. The strike first attitude. That's going to be increased into the minds of these people by Satan herself, by placing fear into the minds. And this hit him before he hits me. This attitude, then, with no love or care, no concern for the end results, just hit him first. That will protect you, they think. Well, that won't protect them, of course. I mean, once the buttons are pushed, nothing is going to stop it. And once one is fired, then here comes the others, and they're all going to come. And China now, they're saying, has over 3,000. They thought they had 800. Now they find out that China has over 3,000 nuclear bombs. 3,000. Think of the thousands that we have. Think of the thousands that Russia has. Pakistan, India, they all have them. And they're all willing. Their minds are willing now. Satan has got them, the reprobate mind, so thickened in the skulls of the whole world that some of them are actually anxious to see the flesh and blood fly through the air. I remember this thing in New York where the nightclubs, they were losing business. And then this owner comes up with a new idea. He gets him a big fish aquarium. He gets him some of these men-eating fish, flesh-eating fish that tears the flesh apart, and he starts advertising the feeding time. And when the feeding time came, their business filled with people to see these fish go in and tear up another fish, a live fish. I saw that myself, and I got rid of the aquarium that I had in my office because somebody brought one of these goofy things. And I said, no more. I don't want that in here. We shut it down. But I don't want to see people hurt. I've never in my life ever wanted to hurt someone else. Never. But I was raised being taught the peaceful solution as best my mother and dad could teach it. Today, we have it to perfection. We have books, we have tapes. You can even play it to your children while they sleep. And it does bring peace. You're the greatest example on earth of that peace. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you, brothers and sisters.